Ladies and gentlemen, in the moments of crisis and transition, whether economic recessions, pandemics, or the climate emergency, liberal democracies are faced with a choice: retreat into austerity or respond with bold strategic action. We stand on the side of action. Deficit financing is not reckless spending. It is a powerful tool that enables governments to protect lives of the vulnerable, sustain livelihoods of all layers of society, and invest in the future worth inheriting. In this debate, we will show you why supporting deficit financing is not only economically sound, but morally necessary. Let us begin by clarifying the terms of this debate before we get into our arguments. Deficit financing refers to the strategy where governments borrow money rather than raising taxes or cutting public spending to cover budget deficits. How this would look like? A. Typically by issuing government bonds or securities in domestic and international financial markets. In Indonesia, we have Obligasi Retail Indonesia or SBR with 5 to 6% fixed annual rate, or in US we have treasury notes or treasury bond with 4 to 5% annual rate depending on the yield of the year. B, or it could be in form of external debt from foreign governments, i.e. bilateral loans, and multilateral institutions like IMF and World Bank. The borrowing usually comes with clearly defined conditions such as fixed or variable interest rates, or strict repayment periods, or increased accountability and transparency, and any other conditions. We, as the proposition, we don't have any problem with this. Let's be all clear that the debate is set in liberal democracies where everything is decided based on free elections and rule of law. We understand that they are not perfect, but these exist to ensure accountability, transparency, and check and balances exist to counterbalance any stupid maneuver from government that they will take. No, thank you. Now, going to the first argument, why this is crucial for the economic growth and economic resilience. The fundamental problem many liberal democracies face is that their economies are vulnerable to stagnation and not resilient enough when crisis strikes, be it a global pandemic, financial shock, or supply chain disruption. During a slowdown or crisis, what happened to the economy? A. Private investment declines, e.g., the corporation don't get the profit margin that enables them to reinvest their money or to increase their production. B. Consumer spending drops. When they lose jobs or when the company no longer gives them bonuses, etc., they refrain from using their money or they need to dig deep into their savings. And consequently, economic activity slows as the compounding effect. If government don't do anything, this will either lead to economic stagnation or spiral down further to economic depression. Ladies and gentlemen, deficit financing allows governments to inject capital into the economy without waiting for tax revenues to catch up. So this means government can finance infrastructure, social programs, direct economic stimulus without waiting for the money to be collected. First, how this would look like. In practice, the funds raised through the means of deficit financing are strategically allocated to revitalize key sectors that directly impact national recovery and human development. This includes financing infrastructure projects like railways, roads, bridges, public transportation systems, expanding access to electricity and clean water, improving healthcare systems by building hospitals, increasing medical capacity, upgrading public education through schools constructions, digital learning programs, or teacher training, ladies and gentlemen, and also investing in job creation schemes, especially for vulnerable and unemployed groups. Without this investment, we cannot attract investors. Corporations will not choose to operate in places where there's no electricity to power their manufacturing plants, no access to clean water, or no reliable infrastructure to support their supply chains. They avoid countries where roads and railways are poorly maintained, where there's no pool of skilled human resources to recruit. Why does this matter, ladies and gentlemen? Wait a second. Because in order to eventually offset the deficit, we need corporations to operate so they can pay taxes. We need corporations to expand and earn more so that the tax base expand. We need people to work so they can earn income, which the government can then tax. Without this basic economic activity, we cannot close the deficit, we cannot repay the debt. But before that,
investors right now are very risk averse because of the stagnation that you mentioned. Exactly in our side of the house where stability on the long term is much more important and it attracts investors.
No, that's wrong. So at the moment, corporations are looking for increasing their profit, and I think where the places that giving them a lot of benefit or they can recoup as much as benefit as they can, that's where they are going to invest, and that's exactly what we are going to have by deficit financing. Now, continuing more. Furthermore, deficit financing allows government to invest in strategic high-potential sectors that are crucial for long-term competitiveness, but are currently underfunded due to budget constraints and directly clash with what Nile POI. These include green energy, blue economy, or sustainable technologies. With the global push toward energy transition and climate resilience, investment in this sector is no longer optional. It is inevitable. Countries that fail to invest today risk falling behind, losing out on future trade, innovation, technological cooperation. This is why countries like China and India are surging ahead because they are aggressively funding their future. This in the context of green energy, blue economy. And even if some of these investment, like education or healthcare, do not offer immediate financial returns, they're still economically justified. We need an educated, healthy workforce to power the economy. If people die due to preventable causes or remain unskilled due to underfunded education, we lose the very human capital that drives national productivity. Comparatively, in our opposition side, what would happen? Number one, they will increase corporate taxes, meaning that you hurt their profit, making businesses less likely to reinvest or expand. In most cases, these corporations divest their funding and profit somewhere else. They move their capital to country with lower tax. This increased tax devastatingly affect the local economy, startups, and SME, which are critically vulnerable. They operate on the thin margins, ladies and gentlemen, and increased tax obligations reduce their ability to grow. They will also increase, in their side of opposition, income and consumption tax, meaning that it reduces disposable income for the people. People don't spend their money as used to, leading to lower demand for goods and services. When you have lower demand, the company needs to reduce their production. When they reduce their production, they need to cut employment and pushing the economy into slowdown. So this domino effect of lower demand, lower production, job cuts, economic contraction undermines the very recovery of the opposition will claim to protect. So it might be true that the tax increases bring more revenue in short term, which can help reduce the budget deficit on paper. However, if economic activity declines, the tax base shrink, ladies and gentlemen, leading to lower than expected revenue. So deficit financing empowers liberal democracies to recover, grow, and lead. It is not a risk, it is a responsibility to invest in people, protect the economy, and secure the future. For all of these reasons, we back to propose.
Who's next? Nazal. Next.
I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Ladies and gentlemen, we think deficit financing in our side as the oppositions will be hamper the growth of the economy at the very first place, because we will tell you on how the evaluations on certain government institutions will be less likely happen, because in our side we would champion merit-based financing system. What does it mean? We would like to conduct budgeting allocations to the government institutions based on the performance of each institutions. We can see something that we can see qualitatively or quantitatively in terms of their corruptions index, rate of transparency and accountability, and also the public trust toward these certain institutions. What does it mean? It means that when a certain institutions able to show their lower number of corruptions index and lower number and high number of accountability and transparency, meaning that in our side, our government and through the economic ministry, we can allocate a certain budget toward these institutions based on the needs of this institution itself. Comparatively, if they shows the unproductivity or counterproductivity on the goals that they want to achieve, we said that it is very justifiable for us to cut off the budget allocations itself, because at the end of the day, I will explain to you why it shows the deterrent effect in macro level or institutional based evaluation system itself. In our side, we also would like to assess the budget allocations within the several supporting criteria, such as the agenda that these certain institutions would like to champion based on SDGs or not, or we would also evaluate the goals or RAB that these certain institutions would like to propose in the parliamentary hearing based on whether or not these goals or this project in line with the short or long-term strategic plans such as RPJPN or rencana pembangunan jangka menengah and so on and so forth. Why this is important? First, because we would like to encourage every institutions to run based on the system that we already made through a long-term goals that we already set at the very first place. How we are going to champion merit-based system in our side? We would like to consider and assess something that we can see or evaluate qualitatively or quantitatively, like how many courses call that these institutions have made, how many bills that they have discussed for parliamentary, for example, or the commissions of the parliamentary, how many number of corrections exist in that institutions, and so on and so forth. In our side, we also see that the external surveyor also still exists. We don't want to eliminate the external surveyors, for example, like Indonesian Corruption Watch, Good Governance, and Social Impact Awards, and so on and so forth. So, in our side, the counterbalance or the counter evaluator also exists. So there is no argument anymore in oppositions saying that those corruption watch and those corruption rates and index and so on and so forth can be manipulated and so on and so forth, because we have counterbalance at the very first place. Before moving that, yes.
Yeah, the debate set in liberal democracies where accountability, check and balances are the absolute conditions. Why do you think that in our side that doesn't happen?
Yes, it doesn't happen because if we still conduct a deficit financing, whatever the number that these institutions or ministry needs, we can still and we have tendency to fulfill the RAB itself or the needs of the institutions itself. Meaning that if we see that there is a counterproductive of the certain ministry itself in the prior years before they propose the budget itself, we will cut the items of the finance of the budget itself that is not productive. So this is the process of evaluation exists in us, because we don't want to let this budget exist in the institutions. If we evaluate in the prior years it is not exist or it's not running, or we evaluate that it is not strategic at the very first place. So that's the process of evaluations happen in our side. Let's move into point of our substantive. Why merit-based financing allocations is within the spirit of liberal democratic value. First, because we believe that merit-based system is the only evaluations process that is accessible in current status quo. First layer, because we say that through financing, it is something that easily to be internalized by all stakeholders. Why? First, if in the parliamentary hearing, then the Ministry of Economy say that there is certain budget that we should cut significantly into these institutions, meaning that all public aware that the prior years these institutions is not productive. People will know that, and there is also parliamentary hearing and process of evaluation, not only in a high level of government officers such as President and Minister of Economy, but we also involve the parliamentary as a representative of the people itself. So this is why when we evaluate them through the cutting of financial or budgeting toward these certain institutions, meaning that there is process of them to make sure that they are work efficiently and so on and so forth in the futures. Second layers, because through the merit-based financing, we give a significant deterrent effect in the macro level and institution base. If you consider and you're aware that when corruptions happen, when counterproductive happen in PNS, for example, there is no macro changes happen because it is is evaluated in a person or individual level. They don't aware that the existence of corruption also happen because the lack of transparency and accountability on that institutions. So that's the reasons of why the evaluations important in the macro level, because in current status quo, when you see a corruptor, you only present or you are punished a certain or those individuals itself, not to try and evaluate the whole system that exists in institutions itself. That's why a macro level evaluations through the merit-based financing is important on our side. Second argument, because we believe that merit-based system financing is the only way to involve many stakeholders. Why? Because when we evaluate and try to cutting off the budget, people will try to open the discourse itself. Comparatively, when the deficit system happen, deficit financing happen, whatever number budget that you propose in a parliamentary hearing, the parliament would tend easily to goes away with the proposal that you have. Comparatively with us, because there is a huge tendency of the people to evaluate what's going on the project that you made in the prior years. Because of that, we're very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Is this off or no? Oh, okay. It's on. I would like to begin the speech in 3, 2, 1. I believe that the opposition stance is already irrelevant and not focusing on the motion that is begin with, because they are supposed to prove why deficit financing is a bad thing and why it's a better option to reduce expenditures and why it's objectively okay to increase taxes. But instead they focus highly on merits-based stuff that is not exclusive to them and can still happen on us. They say stuff like that they will evaluate and they want to check transparency, but there's no proof that that's not possible on our side too. On our side, we're trying to get financing. On our side, we're trying to get financing by borrowing money from international scales like IMF, WWF, and other stuff that my first speaker has explained. And the money that we get from that is still allocated. Is allocated responsibly, just in the same way that is not exclusive to the opposition party. Yes?
Yes, you can say that you get loans, but you cannot say in fiat that you get favorable trade loans. Why in your side of the house you can get lower interest rates in your side of the house? We said that because of the risk aversion of investors, you have to concede of getting higher interest rates or just proving ownership of infrastructure.
Although there are harms in taking deficit financing, history has already proven why taking these loans and borrowing money from international organizations has proven to be beneficial, and the risk does not outweigh the benefits, and on the other side the benefits actually outweigh the risk. For example, in history it's already proven during the economic crisis during the Depression era, where things are starting to become a problem, the IMF and the World Bank has actually come to help in many countries that are actually going through recessions, going through disasters, and has proven again and again why it's actually safe and the risk is not actually worth worrying. Now, onto my argument. The first thing that I would like to argue is that countries need a foundation first. We can't rely on waiting. We can't rely on reducing expenditures and increasing taxes. The best proactive solution is this deficit financing. first, what does a country need? A country needs a good well-being for their people. They need to be resilient to disasters, to crisis. What does this mean? They need a good economy. And to build a good economy, first we need to build a good local economy. A good local economy, so we can in the future we can get into international economy and improve economy. But the main thing about economy is that we can improve the infrastructure, we can improve the well-being, etc., etc. And to do that, we need good education, we need good skill, we need good infrastructure. That's my first speaker has said. We need good electricity, we need good roads, we need good buildings, we need water, etc., etc. And to get these good education and skills, the deficient financing can actually help build up the foundation for that. Because if we borrow the money, we already get a proactive head start on the money that we need, and we can actually allocate it in a way that, again, is not exclusive to the opposition side. It's still possible on our side that we can see which side is more productive, which side it has bring more potential in the future to increase that economy. We can build good foundation because that is what a country needs. The country needs. Capital provides by low interest loan, and it could give the infrastructure. It can increase the economy to the country. And my second argument, the other option is very harmful and is downright problematic. The only other option that the opposition can bring and defend is by reducing expenditures and increasing taxes. My first speaker has already explained why this is bad. But I would like to extend it by not only does it prevents corporations from investing and lowers the economy and creates a spiral of economy depression. It also harms the vulnerable actors. That is the people of minorities, people who are in low economy. Increasing taxes can lead to increased inflation in the country. And what is the guarantee that the reducing of expenditures and increasing taxes can proactively and efficiently fix problems and prevent disasters and actually help our country compete with other countries in the time in the status quo where the future is very unpredictable, and hard times is more than likely, if not inevitably, will happen. People who are vulnerable, minorities, people who are disabled, people in low economy, they will get the hard hit of this, because when you increase taxes, every price goes up. The price for food, the price for electricity, the price for water. Reducing expenditures, that means we're cutting off expenditures for areas, for allocations that the government that can completely be biased, especially in the status quo. Can easily cut off areas of their population that they believe does not give them enough productivity, aka people who they believe are unproductive, minorities, people who are disabled, people who have health risks, people who are already unemployed, people who have a hard time in the status quo in low economy. This shows why on our side it actually protect vulnerable actors, why deficient financing is the only proactive and the only optimal option, and why the only other options that the opposition brings, that is reducing expenditures and increasing taxes, this isn't only a less favorable option, but it's also downright harmful and problematic for the people in the country itself. For all those reasons, so proud to propose.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We believe that under opposition side of the House, what we want under our side is that we would involve all stakeholders, and this is what we try to propose under opposition. We want to involve the people, the society itself, the people who work in the government, the people who create the regulation. We want all of them to involve in decision making, just in case, so that it can open more discussion and so there will be more check and balance in the system. But what's happened under government side of the House is that we think that there's less check and balance due to like the centralized decision making in order by, for example, by borrowing monies from like IMF or like other countries that most likely going to lend money for you. We think this is not going to bring benefit in the long term. I'm going to explain to you later in my argument. Before I move on, a few rebuttals towards the government side of the House. Firstly, they told you that, oh yeah, under our side of the House, we're not going to allocate money into like waters, food, for example. Firstly, we think that all our money, if we want to prioritize the people, especially in a recession or in the hard times, of course, we're going to still prioritize primary needs of the people. This is to say, we're going to reduce money allocation into like something that's so advanced technology or like any kind of like fancy ceremonial done by the ministry, for example. We would allocate more of that money into the primary needs of the people. But in the end of the day, we would still have like not so significant amount of money go to like green energy if you still wanted to have that under our side, under our side of the House. But secondly then, they told you about how there's going to be like corporation would come into their own country because they're prioritizing like green energy and those kind of technology. Firstly, the moment when you try to borrow money, this is why most likely you're going to borrow money from China instead of like IMF or other organization that's going to be rational enough in giving interest rate. The reason is because China is the country that wants to like hold so many countries below them. This is to say that most likely they're going to like reduce the barriers, the barriers for you to borrow the money. But in the end of the day, in the process of paying back to China, you're going to have to pay back a lot of money. This is what exactly happened in Sri Lanka, for example, because they can't pay back China. One of their land that being used as a seaport got taken by China because they can't pay back to China. This is what happened. Or in Indonesia, for example, our workers are currently dominated by China's workers because we borrow so much amount of money from them. This is what you're going to happen under your side of the House. So even if in the end of the day you said that you're going to achieve like corporation would come into your country because all of the advancement that you have, firstly, you're not going to have that corporation that you want because most likely China would want their corporation to come into your country and also their workers. So secondly then, you would have less option of corporation in the end of the day, and so it's still going to be bad under your side of the House. Secondly then, they also said about like you're going to be left behind because you're not investing in like the green economy, blue economy, advanced technology. We told you already, we're just going to reduce the amount of money. So firstly, we're still going to have that kind of investment in like green and blue technology, but then it's not going to be that significant. But secondly, that we would have way better check and balance on our side of the House, because under our side of the House, the people who's handling the blue and green economy, the green and blue technology that to advance the economy would be most likely under like high check and balance, and they would be more motivated to be good at handling their technology and everything.
Just China might be aggressive, that be true, but that is symmetrical in both sides. Comparatively, we are better because at least our infrastructure being financed by China. In your side, there's no infrastructure development at all.
I'm going to explain to you later why that investment in terms of technology would still going to exist on our side of the House. Take the example of Indonesia, right? We think that under Indonesia itself, the reason why technology from other countries would still going to be able to be acquired by Indonesia is because first, with Indonesia, take the example of Indonesia, right? We have this international community, we join international organization, and we think that in current status quo, the reason why such technology wouldn't be that expensive anyway, because we think that it's currently flourished, right? And countries such as China and also US, they're competing to spread their technology, to spread their green energy car. So that's why it's going to be much way cheaper. It's not that so expensive, just like what you said before. So it means that technology can still be acquired. We understand it's not going to be that fast, but at the very least, we can still provide the people, but not making in the long term, we're gonna have to pay back in such huge amount of money and like to China and to other aggressive countries in the end of the day. Moving on to my arguments then. Why then borrowing money itself is going to be harmful to in the long term to the country itself? Firstly, we think that
boring, reduce the evaluation. Just like what my first speaker told you about the evaluation that exists. We think the reason why deficit financing isn't that transparent anyway, because it's just involving the stakeholders, which is the people who decide whether we should like borrow money or not. This does not involve the people who's actually responsible to take care of that sectors. This is to say that they will just gonna listen to what the ministry said. Oh yeah, for example, oh we have like less money to build such technology. Okay, then we're just gonna borrow more and more. We're gonna borrow more and more money. Comparatively to other hours of the house, the moment when we like reduce money allocation to certain sectors, they're going to be motivated into like use the money more wisely in order for them to still get funded by the government. This is to say they're going to have more reports on the progress of their technology, on the progress of their project, often to the government in order to so that the appeal to the government and these projects is worth of funding. This is not what happened under your side of the house, because the moment when they got less money and they don't have much money to pay for the project, they're just going to keep on asking and the government would say yes to every single thing that they said, because it's easier to borrow money and not require so many things in the end of the day. This is what's bad and what's not transparent under your side of the house. But yeah, what in the end of the day, it's going to be bad also to the countries. Firstly, we think that the moment when you borrow money, this is to say like China, aside from you having to like give back later on in as a form of interest to their countries, you also still need to like support their agenda that is probably not in line with you. This is to say that if you borrow money from the US, you still gotta have to like follow what their interest is, and this is what you're going to receive backlash in the end of the day. But secondly, that what even if like we gotta have to like increase taxes, it's still going to be okay. Firstly, we're still going to have discussion, right? The moment when the people feels as if like, they need to pay more, it means there's going to be more eyes put on the government, and it means there's going to be more check and balance from the people. We think that those are the benefits that exist from our side of the house, and for all of those reasons, Rob will post.
I think that this motion is actually far more on international relations part, because we are going to engaging for far more country that might not be liberal democracies, but we are going to improve our relations to liberal countries that probably have the same vision to us and have the same probably problems to us as a liberal countries. I think that to respond to the opposition side of the house, I think that their argument about evaluations is symmetrical, which is they say that the institutional would not work that well because we're probably lazy and we're not going to be far more work hard. But we say that there's going to be external pressures because we borrow money from outside of our countries. We borrow money from China as an example. There's going to be external pressure for us to work really well. But on your side of the house, you're not going to work that well because your friends probably going to be laid off. You're forced to be work probably 200% more, and you're going to be having a taxes that probably would not going to be used for the benefit of citizens. But a few set of them. The problem is the liberal democracy system is different than monarchy, as an example. It does not have the safety net that has a king who say that this is the money that going to solve these certain problems. Notice that OG come into this debate. We're not going to be specified what types of problem that they're going to be solving. As an example, yeah, economic problem. But what economic problem is? Jobs, as an example, or social issue. What social issue? And we as a CG, we're going to explain all of that. But coming back to liberal democracies, every liberal democracies had the new administrations at certain times, meaning that they inherit a problem that cannot be solved by the previous administration, as an example. So they have that burden to solve this. Maybe job problem, as an example. Maybe minorities problem, as an example. So they have the active decisions to make a program that can actually sell to the audience or sell to the citizens that vote them, and they have to run that program that are really high. What are this program, as an example? This program is really high. As an example, maybe free lunch like MBG, like maybe 90 million job fair that Prabowo administrations offer to us, right? We cannot we cannot cut our taxes. We cannot cut our do efficiencies, because those programs are really big and need such an instant money to actually going to be successful anyway, and it needs high impact for the program itself. So you need to borrow money to actually run that program, right? So democratic country has political discussions, check and balance, and we think that it's safe to say that all of those kind of policies, all of those kind of implementations have been through a process of check and balance, and have been through a political discussions. And we say that this looks like, this looks like borrowing money, as an example. OG explained the benefit in these motions, but we're going to explain exclusively why did liberal democracy have to do this. OG also said that they will going to be borrowing from international organizations, as an example IMF and etc. Right? But we say that most of our countries borrowing are coming from another countries, meaning that we're not borrowing from IMF, we're not borrowing from any organization or institutions, because it's high on interest. We're going to borrow from countries like China, as an example, countries like US, as an example, that have significant collaborations with us, right? We're going to borrow for them. This looks like a form of cooperations with another countries. This looks like it's not like you get money and also you're going to turn that back and pay the interest. But this looks like Turkey, as an example, that they're borrowing money from EU, that EU gives, because their incentive for EU to stop immigrations coming from Africa, right? As an example, because Turkey is actually land or pathway for illegal immigrations, right? So Turkey is actually borrowing money from EU to actually solve their maybe jobs, as an example, the jobs opportunity in their country, to solve more, to make more investments in their country, so that people can live prosperous and not immigrate to EU, as an example. What is going to be mean? This means that the form of paying back is not that high. It's not that serious like IMF, as an example. It's not that serious like opposition said, that China is going to be backstabbing us at the end of the day. But the payback is that the lower in the payback is probably going to be having 50% of the money that has been borrowed, because we solve their problem, 75, or maybe lower interest rate, because their incentive is also because their problem is also solved by cooperations with us, right? So the link back is we're going to have more sustainability. Yes.
Yeah. US is cutting its investment in emerging countries. China is right now the only investors with no competition. So it's likely that China have higher bargaining position than your country in making trade deals and loan deals.
That's what we're saying. China is going to have Belt Road Initiative, which means that they're going to be having cooperations with countries like Myanmar, like Thailand, right? Like countries like that. There's going to be more cooperations with that country, which means that in this liberal country, where the borrowing money from countries like China, as an example, will have more benefit than the opposition, will have such more benefit than borrowing from IMF as an example, because you have the incentive to actually fix your road, because they also want have a foreign policy to actually invest in this Belt Road Initiative as an example. So we say that the point of sustainability, we say that the point of concern from the opposition and also opening government solve on CG, right? So about check and balance, then there are going to be more check and balance on our side. Why? Because another country will going to be concerning about their money as an example. They're going to be concerned, what my money in these corporations will going to be looks like, will going to be used. We are going to be having an incentive to report back to the country itself to serve as a payback to their money. Thank you.
Check. Okay. 3, 2, 1. This is a value judgment debate. The burden of CEO is not to prove the comparative solution works. We just have to prove that why the proposal on golf is harmful and counterproductive to their own goal. If we can prove to you that the economy doesn't just stagnate to recess over time in their side of the house, we win. What independent rebuttal that takes out CG? Their case is dependent on China being good or IMF being available. If you rebut this, they're gone. First, it is unlikely that China have incentive to be altruistic in trade deals or loan deals, because here's the thing. US just pulled out all of their investments in the entire Southeast Asia, so China being the only investor there means that they have higher bargaining position. If countries like Indonesia or Malaysia wants to have a good trade deals, it is likely that China don't want to invest as much. But second, I would argue that there's a lot of race to the bottom exactly because of the limited amount of investment that China has. I.e. Malaysia and Indonesia are probably going to race to the bottom in terms of types of regulation that they make. Which means that the type of interest rates or the concession of ownership of infrastructure is likely to be higher in their side of the house. Secondly, IMF and World Bank. I would argue that the availability of IMF and World Bank to invest or make loans is actually smaller right now. Because here's the thing, China just pulled out all of their money from IMF to put in their own development bank. US right now is also quite protectionist and pull out their money. So right now we argue that IMF and World Bank actually have very limited capacity investing in things like loans, especially if those loans are having diminished returns every 5 to 10 years over time. So I would argue that in this case, IMF is actually going to be much more careful in investing on debts in their side of the house. What are we going to prove to you in this debate? Firstly, we're going to prove to you why it is unlikely for this debt to be paid over time. Goff did not prove any of this. Second, we're going to talk about why you get very bad trade deals which is outside of loan. This is mentioned on either side. First, why you are unlikely to pay this debt over time. Firstly, we said that the global economy right now is very overheating. We agreed with OG that right now the global economy stagnates. We get this not because of spending or anything. This is inherent to the fact that there's an increasing diminished returns to the GDP growth for the global economy, to the point where it's very hard for any country to have a 5% GDP growth. Most countries have 2, 3, and that's for countries like the US. A lot of countries get 1% or even like 0.5%, for example. Because everything's already somewhat developed. The reason why economic boom happens 50 years ago, because there are a lot of investment through basic infrastructure. Right now, it's very hard to scale up because everything is developed. So even if you invest in sectors that OG mentioned, the ROI is marginal and therefore it's guaranteed to have diminished returns. We see this happening. The EV industry literally stagnates after just 2 to 3 years. Right now, the EV boom happening like 2022, rather 2025 is sluggish. But second, government cannot fiat they have favorable loan deals in their side of the house. And I think this is for two reasons. Right now, exactly because of economic stagnation and recession, most investors right now are both risk averse and very short term. They are likely want to exit your market in the next 5 years. Why is this the case? Because a lot of investments right now are very speculative. A lot of industry currently are quite stagnant and have unclear ROI. Even the EV industry, which right now can be very potential 2 years ago, oftentimes now are not seen as good investments because they're very speculative. Because in just 2 years, they stagnate. Even in the US, a lot of investment goes down because the rat wave of stock downturns means that right now, even in the most liberal democracy in the world, right now investor confidence get low. What happens here is that means that in your side of the house, it is very likely that you have to concede much more in order to convince investors that are very risk averse and for them to give you trade deals over 30 years as opposed to 10 years because they're likely to want to exit your market on the short term. But more importantly, if you don't believe what I said, previously, regardless of accountability measures of liberal democracy and OG mentioned, I check and balance, exactly because the bargaining position is askew. You need to make much more concession in the negotiation of your loan deals if the investor is risk averse. But even then, race to the bottom means that liberal democracies have to compete with illiberal democracies or technocratic authoritarian states like Iran, for example, because they're likely to give less regulations to their own loan deals. So if you're a country like Indonesia, you probably have to compete and race to the bottom with countries like Iran, but sure.
On your side, it's very slow progress, and it can actually build up progress.
Yes. You don't have to prove the comparative. You just have to prove by your side does it's slower. What's the impact of this? First, you actively get unfavorable loan deals with really high interest rates. Your payment increased by 5% every year. At most, these loan deals go for 20, 30 years. Means that you are dependent on these loans increasing your growth rate in the next 20 or 30 years by 5%, which is very unlikely because of the diminished returns of global economy. More importantly, recouping the loan, like OG mentioned, means that investors are more likely to be aggressive, i.e., your interest rates are unlikely to be fixed 5%. It's likely that your interest rates also exponentially increase as your GDP does not grow. Secondly, this means that your economy is probably unstable in the next 5 to 10 years because of the ROI you have to go to exactly pay your loans. So all of the benefit that Goff mentioned is marginal. You cannot invest all of the ROI on things like infrastructure or healthcare. It means that even if you have short-term growth right now, in 5 years you cannot reinvest because you have to give all of that money to pay back the loans. So even if they have growth only exists in the first 3 to 5 years. On the next 10 years, you have to literally pay back the loan. On the comparative, we're fine with trading off some low growth or slow growth in our side of the house for long-term stability. Because at the very least, we wait for the global economy to be liquid in the next 10 years, and then we can be very flexible on spending. This is much more important than what Goff says. It's already 6 minutes. Secondly, why you actually get unfavorable trade deals, not loan deals, when your market destabilizes. 3 reasons for this. Do note that non-loans investments probably exists in Mexico on either side of the house. This looks like joint venture capital, for example, or just your a foreign company establishing their branch in your country, or you just have like trade deals with other countries, like you have bilateral trade. Problem is that even if you have infrastructure like OG mentioned, when you are perceived as reckless and unstable, you are less likely to get joint venture capitalists because they are very short-termists here. Oftentimes they want to exit your market in the next 5 years. Means that even if you have growth, the fact that the money goes out next 5 years means that you hollowed out your economy because investments is no longer there. You get worse currency rates in their country, means that prices go up, means that the workers and the SMEs that they talk about actively gets harmed in their side of the house once your market is stabilized in the next 5 years. For all these reasons, so proud to oppose. Here.
CO case is stagnant on the idea that we can borrow money because the external actors are that evil and have high bargaining power. I think that one clarification that is very important here, right? China is not the only actor that we can borrow money from, panels. We can also borrow money from India, for example, from the European Union, for example, where we can still work together. China is only one example that give bring, but they never respond to you. But they never respond to us. That Turkey that also borrow money from EU to set the immigration problem, for example, meaning that you have to stop cherry-picking our case, which is only beneficial to your case, right? We have explained to you that these countries, that these liberal democracies that borrow money from other countries is because we have a specific, on achieving a specific economic and social programs, right? It's not something that we do every year, but it's something that we do only when we want to achieve this something specific. We explain to you the exclusive case of like MBG or like freelance program that we want to achieve in this administration, or like the 19 millions of job fields that we want to achieve, right? This is something that is only exclusive, and this is something that will only happen because we need instant money and we don't need slow progress, right? This is something that CO never explained to you, panels, but they only keep talking about slow progress is okay because it's gonna be sustainable, but they never explain to you why slow progress is okay in this type of programs where it needs instant money, why slow progress is okay in this type of program where you need to do freelance programs in this administration later. I think that what happened on your side is that sustainability will never happen because to begin with, you don't have any safety net. He already explained to you the context of liberal democracy where we don't have any safety net of form of money, right? Where we don't have any safety net form of an investment that can instantly like stabilize our economy. It's different from like monarchy or like kingdoms or like other countries that don't have these liberal democracies because they have safety net, for example. That is why it's exclusive to only liberal democracy, right? If we can prove that borrowing money will still work and support our specific economic and social program, we win. One independent rebuttal to CO then. About the case that China have high bargaining power. Three responses for this. Firstly, I think that China will only have high bargaining power when they are giving money to countries that don't have any regulation, for example. But what happened with liberal democracy? See the status quo, panels. Liberal democracy are countries like the US, Indonesia, or like Turkey, for example. Meaning that our country still have our own regulations. Our country still have our own economy protectionism, for example. Meaning that other Chinas or like the country China, India, or like EU, whatever, the countries that we borrow money from, they cannot just do any evil things because we are in countries that still have regulation because there's still kind of relations that they can do with us, right? That is why they will also have the incentive to not be that evil, or like they also have the incentive to not make the interest rate that high because we can still work together as countries. Because for example, they want to build the BLT in Indonesia, for example, meaning that the form of working together, the form of paying back is true that way, right? This is the analysis that they never respond from give panels. But thirdly then, I think that even if it's high, I think that it's okay because there's still immediate progress that happen, right? Under your side, the progress you want to make for these specific programs will never happen, meaning that the freelance program will never work on your side, meaning that the 19 million job fields will never work on your side because the progress will only happen in the next administration, meaning that nothing works under your side, right? Moving to my class then later, talking about which strategy is the most effective. I think that on opening, they keep talking about instant money versus a merit-based financing, right? Panels, why on OG? They explain why it's very needed in times of recession and etc. But they don't explain why it's very hard in liberal democracies, especially if your country is like Indonesia and Turkey, right? But we explain to you the context of these specific objectives and why it will work, panels, because there's no safety net, right? But secondly, the explanation about investment is never that strong. That's why it's easy for all to tackle this. But how did we explain it, right? We explain to you the form of working together, the form of paying back the loans is not only true like giving them the money, right? But it's also true like working together. To Turkey that's solving the immigration problem for EU, for example. This is the form of paying back that works, meaning that we don't have to pay back 100% back the money, but it can also like 50% 1% and all of that, right? The way is that the point of evaluation on OO it's symmetrical because it's also bad on your side, even worse because if the institution is that bad, meaning all the benefits that you say about like the slow progress will never work, right? But under our side, even if it's bad, we expand to you while we will still have the external pressure to make the evaluation better, right? On China, building for example, on China, like we have to build corporations on our side, meaning there's an agreement to also make our workers work there, right? This is effective because of the investment, right? You have to work well and use the money to really make sure the specific programs work on our side because the pressure that exists. This is an exclusive information that only exists in OOG, in CG. Before
non-loans investments still exist symmetrically to fund and stimulate the economy. You have to prove exclusively why is it loans that needs to be done and why you can pay back those loans in the next 5 years.
What is the difference with investment and no loan investment? I think that it's very clear. Under our side, when you have loan investment, for example, there's a direct working together with other countries. But on your side, the no loan investment will only work when your countries is that good enough because there's no relation to begin with, right? This is the explanation that's exclusive because, for example, you want like investment from like Apple or like Samsung, for example. But when your countries don't have anything to invest with, and why would they invest to you, right? Under our side, I think that we don't have to explain why it was going to be sustainable in the next like 10 years, but we just have to explain to you why the form of paying back that the analysis that come from D will work under our side because exactly right, the form of paying back exists when these countries have that direct relations or like the investment or like BLT for example or like the investment that comes from EU to Turkey for example, that will work because the relationship is mutual at the end of the day, right? Why are we better than OG then? I think that why we're better than OG, I think that it's very clear. Firstly, we explain to you the context of achieving specific economic and social objectives. Secondly, we explain to you the prerequisite of their benefits, why it's exclusively a big problem in the liberal democracies or because of the different backgrounds and there is too many problems that need to be solved. But lastly, we insert our concern that's coming from opposition, that is nothing but corruption and ineffective situation from OO and the case of sustainability from CO. Under all those reasons, CG wins. Thank you.
Government side has failed to explain how to ensure country that do investment wouldn't harm their own country itself. So imagine that your port has been taken to due to some investment and borrow money from developed country that has that give you that loan. In these cases, in closing oppositions, we would like to stand again that it doesn't mean that we don't stand for investment. Yes, we do. However, we try to prove in here why loan is bad. In our side, investment doesn't have to be a loan again. Extending to what my first speaker already said that investment could be good. However, if you do loans, imagine in the 5 years later, you cannot grow your GDP because like you're focusing on to bring back the money to the countries that give you the loans. In the fact that China is really, in the fact that in your side you say China is totally fine to make those kind of investments, but thank you. But in the entire fact, China is bad. Why? Because they try to dominate the areas of the from their BRI, like the Belt Road Initiative. That's like example from like Solomon Islands. Solomon Islands itself have the investment and cooperation with China in terms of the maritime security and also to do the infrastructures in there like port and road and everything. However, in these cases, other than it can be harmed to become a threat to other countries, these kinds of investments or corporations just bring more harm to the countries itself. Why? Because they become too dependent, and while they become too dependent, they cannot focusing on how to build their economic growth. Yes, maybe in the government side they say we wanted to build a local economy to make sure that our country can be resilient to our own economy. Yes, it's true, but in these cases, it took times and we try to prove in here why then having a deficit financing in the liberal democracies is it's bad. Therefore, there will be if we see that if we use any kinds of like loans, it will make if we use kind of investments, yes, it sure can make a slower economic growth, but we are fine with that as long as later on this country can make sure that investments are making a multiply by circling the money or like develop things from those kind of investments. And again, why why causing opposition could win this debate, as my first speaker already explained to you, that this motions is more or less in our side. We can prove that loans will be very bad, and we try to ensure that countries that use loans and also prove that countries that use loans will be definitely fail and getting more harm instead of investment.